We have to deal with the question, while all of this is happening this year, the role of the media in bringing everything in context so the listeners can, in fact, follow it. Because this is inside baseball. You are all learned in this area. There are a lot of folks who want to pick up the paper and get some context, get some feeling. How you thought covering some of these scandals, including Clico, how well was that done to bring the listeners to educate the listeners, to bring them along to understanding what is before them? What kind of a job you think the media did?
Well, there's a reporting that comes from just news. In terms of understanding, it's mostly reporting other people's analysis, and Afra also played through his columns and his blog a big part in providing context and analysis and so on. But I don't think that the media has the routine and built-in capacity for analysis of that level. So you're usually hostage to the opinions of the persons you seek out, or the persons who put themselves forward to offer opinion. And these are all the interested people with an interest. So at the end of the day, the question is the public better informed, more alert, and all these things that Winford says that we are now, as a result of it, we wouldn't make those mistakes and so on. I'm not as optimistic in that way. I don't think that we would have learned much. And in any case, I do not agree that the regulatory framework in that matter has been so tightened up that it is not at the whims of politicians. So the media, throughout all the issues, not just Clico, I think it can take credit for breaking all these issues came to us through the media. But does it always come through the work of investigative journalists and so on? Some do, but a lot of it is a game of leaked information, one party against the other, with the media being used in that process.
And sometimes when we talk, when we speak in terms of the news itself, we cannot be unmindful of the contribution that columnists like yourselves make. I mean, you all columnists in the Express, and folks take time and they read your columns and they get the enlightenment there. Rhoda is on the internet. You do a lot of blogging. Again, clarity comes in that form too. I want to go into, and I'm going to stay with you, Sunity, and then pass it on to the rest of the panel. March of this year is when we had Miss Vanilla Allen Toppin come to the house, and this came at the same time that no confidence motion was being brought against Dr. Rowley. And he decided that we don't want to hear this. We're not staying for this. But she went on with something that I think shocked even the most, seemed to shock even the most devout of believers in the present government, because this was just beyond the pale. How do you think that factored in to the loss of comfort/confidence of the government in the eyes of those who were so-called marginal voters, those undecided? And I want to take that because I want to follow through on whether that had an impact. Earlier, Afra said he did not think that Jack Warner was a major impact, and I hope I quote you correctly there. But how major do you think this had an impact on the voters for the election that saw the PP out of government?
The battle is increasingly for the people in the center in the politics. I've said before that I think the guaranteed vote on both sides is about 15%. And it is the people in the middle, the remaining, well, not everybody votes, but the majority is in the middle, and they are the ones who have been changing governments. If the politics was as ethnic-based as plenty of people think it is, one party would stay in office. They'd have enough people supporting them to stay in office. But it is the people who are in the middle. And I think a lot of those persons, the outrage factor could have solidified that vote. But by then, I think the scale of the PP's error in bringing that, in proceeding with a plan that had been at least 2 years old. I mean, I think people in the media had been hearing that the PP was planning to come since before Jack Warner, resigned and put himself up for election. In fact, when Jack Warner had his meeting in Felicity to announce that he was going out on his own, he said, I have a file here on Mr. Dr. Rowley, but I'm not going to bother with that now. And I think that I would be surprised if he wasn't a key figure in developing that line of attack and bringing Mrs. Vanilla Toppin into it. They did not read the wind sufficiently, the PP, to understand that that moment had passed. And in fact, the tide, a number of events since the plan was hatched, had shifted public opinion, and you knew then that the ridiculous notion of a motion of no confidence against an opposition leader, which is absolutely meaningless, absolutely pointless. Yes, it was merely a device for being able to drop that piece of information into the public domain. So the whole thing, and one of the symbolic moments was the departure of the Prime Minister from the House, as Mrs. Toppin was delivering this, because I think she might have even felt it in her pores, making such a bold statement in the presence of empty opposition chairs. It just was, her political antenna alone would have communicated something is wrong here.
Sunity Maharaj, let me take this right across to your right and go straight to Dr. James, because at the end of the day, she's right. Everyone looking in say she was aware of it. The entire party was aware of this. But what do you ascribe that judgment, that decision to go forward to? I mean, it is clear, I think, that if you go to the extent Ms. Toppin did, and this is not irrefutable facts she was talking about, and the party knew about it, how could you approve this? You're demonizing for something that is going to come back and hit you. I oftentimes say that you can say what you want, but you can be checked, verified, and contradicted.
Well, the Constitution does make our political prime ministers crazier than they started off with. The Constitution gives them, and they begin to enjoy an endless supply and possibility of the use of power. That overtook Kamala Persad-Bissessar, in my judgment. And she got, because the people around her were not as independent as they should have been, they didn't have their own constituencies to bolster them. They were receivers of patronage. They supported her. And Vanilla Allen Toppin was a prime example of that, because she was willing to give up whatever constituency the top still had in Tobago, for an alignment with Kamala Persad-Bissessar. And that's why some people suspect that she was paid to do what she did, because one of the effects was the loss of the Tobago, Eastern Tobago, West constituencies.
Oh, as I heard one time, the top came off, but please continue.
Okay, that's another way of saying it. And then, of course, for me, the worst that could have happened is the use of your majority in Parliament to get rid of the opposition leader. Every government that we have had has a majority. If you can use that majority to kick the opposition out, then something is wrong.
That's right.
So there is the question of the tolerance levels of the people of this country. Can they take that? Let us see how far we can abuse our power. Let's show them that we have power. That was the most indecent, the most undemocratic thing, in my judgment, that happened in 2015 when Rowley was kicked out.
It was also a big signal. I'm going to go across to Rhoda Bharath on the other side. The social media got very, very alive with this V. Thomas situation. How much of an impact you think the response and the conversation that took place on social media had with making clear to the general population that this lady has gone way overboard and this is not acceptable?
Huge impact. First thing, it played to the UNC base, and it played to the PNM base in exactly the way it was meant to play to them, polarize them. What I think the government, that government was attempting to do was to kind of shift some support in its direction for people that would have perceived Rowley in a particular way. Let's be very straight here. That entire debate was part of a campaign strategy, right? There was a long-standing No Rowley campaign, and that was one of the early salvos in that No Rowley campaign. Since 2012, when they had begun the THA campaign, Rudal Munilal had already begun making statements that kind of alluded to Rowley and a secret child and this and that and the other. So there was nothing new about it beyond the fact that it had now become Hansard documented piece of information. Now, what it did was it scandalized people, because we still have a sense of this is what the parliament is supposed to be for. And that particular debate was nothing short of crass and vulgar. And people had a huge problem with that. And that's where all of a sudden, Colm Imbert, right, became a popular figure because of the speech he made before walking out of the parliament, because his speech channeled public outrage, right? And the thing about it is he gave the speech even before Vanilla gave her speech. But the way in which he gave it told you that the PNM had probably already anticipated what the debate was going to be about. So I suspect that people knew and both sides had a fair sense of what was going on. But I also wanted to touch on something that Sunity had started talking about and that you had raised, this whole business of media responsibility. There are too many instances, and that debate with Vanilla Allen Toppin is one of the examples where the media does not step up to its investigative role. There's a lot of information. I don't need to look at news at night. I don't look at news at night. Why? Because all of the main stories that come onto the news station at night, I know already by about midday. I've heard already by about midday from various people and various channels. So what you get in the night, in my opinion, is a regurgitation of details that have been circulating all day long. The real investigation, the real contextualization of stories, that does not happen. We have currently this whole business with Joala Rambaran being fired. I have yet to see a newspaper article or story that really goes into first, how was he hired? And how did that lead up to how he was fired? Because Joala's story, his 3 years as central bank governor, it's important for us to have the context of his hiring for us to also understand and make and draw conclusions about his firing. Too often you will have, let's use the budget debate. Colm Imbert comes with a bunch of figures and says, this is what has happened in the last 5 years under them. Then the opposition gets up and says, oh, all of that is a lie. This is what really happened. And nobody from the media says, well, you know what? Let me go to the Ministry of Finance or let me go to the central bank and get the figures from them to see whether or not we can compare and contrast and see who has the right figures. They throw their hands up in the air and they will say, well, we don't know who actually quoting the correct figures. And that is irresponsible. You know why? Because you've got at least 1.1 million people, the voters, depending on you to put information out there that we can digest and analyze.
At the end, point you're taking at the end of the day, that raises a whole question about the CSO, but we're going to get to that in a minute. I do want to shoot this one at Afra, because when we got into the area of what I think is the biggest money story, the biggest money story of the year is what took place at the National Gas Company. I mean, in general, when you look at the totality of the money that was spent, I mean, we had so much money being given out to a, what is it, Get Happy campaign?